Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Hares Testing Ground from 1A Games. Now, if you recognize the name 1A Games, that's because they're very well known for a very different style of game called Tide of Iron. It's actually a license that they were co-publishing with Fantasy Flight Games. Now I think they're kind of doing it on their own. I reviewed it earlier in the year, and it was quite a good war game, but an accessible war game at that. But like I said, Crosshairs is a very different theme and very different gameplay. It takes place in sort of a fictional fantasy world where there's anthropomorphic rabbits who are constantly engaged in wars with one another. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure of the storyline of this universe, although it seems very interesting. So you take control of one of these different humanoid rabbit creatures, the Crosshairs of the title, and you are trying to get to the testing ground and destroy the factory. And actually you can use a story card, and maybe some other different random events happen when you finally get to the end. But this is essentially a roll and move game surprise, as they like to say. So you roll and move, try to get to the end, and try to avoid all the different setbacks that you might encounter along the way while using your own different special abilities in order to get you further and further along and be the first person to get there and destroy the factory. That's just a very brief synopsis of what the game is like. So let's go ahead and take a brief overview where I can show you what it's like. Then we're going to come back and I'll let you know what I think. Okay, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of Crosshairs Testing Ground. This is a competitive game for 2 to 4 players. Your goal is you start off at one of these points at the bottom of the map. You'll determine player order randomly, and everyone's going to choose a different character and then put their little standee in the appropriate spot determining player order. Then you're going to proceed, and this is a roll and move game. So what you're trying to accomplish to get from this end of the map all the way up, zigzagging along until you get to the factory. Now, I'm not really entirely sure what this theme is supposed to be, but you're these anthropomorphic rabbits, and you're trying to take out this evil factory that's full of, like, I don't know, my theory is that they're doing like testing on animals, but like on a grand scale, and it involves radiation and nuclear bombs, all these different things. I don't know, but you're like a bunch of soldiers and mercenaries who are trying to put a stop to this. So the first person to get to that factory space, you have 2 options here. You can either fight it and destroy it, or the game comes with this like storyline card where when you get to that point, instead of just fighting it, you roll the die and have a random encounter. So it could be fortune and glory, you just automatically win, you find a bunch of treasure, or there's other enemies that you have to fight, or there may be a friend or a foe there, things like that, little random events. So getting back to the beginning of the game, each player is going to choose one of these characters. You can either do it randomly or pass the cards along and have people choose one. There's a bunch of different characters that come with the game, and they all have the same basic setup of their cards. So you'll have their name, their title, which does actually matter for some cards, so it'll only affect certain types of characters, a little bit of background, and then every character has a special ability. When the special ability applies, it'll happen. So Constance says that at the start of her turn, if an opponent is in a space adjacent to her, you can steal a card from that player. If your hand is full, you have to either play or discard a card before you do that. Then you have, every character has items and specialties. So during the course of the game, you might get little item pouches here. So these are just generic little pouches, but depending on where you put them on your character sheet, that will give you a different special ability. So if I were to put it on the map skill, it means that I get to, every time that I move, I get to it, I must add 1 space to my movement. If I was to put it on the rope, the dead end effects would have no effect on me. If I put it on the backpack, I get to hold up to 2 extra cards, or Poison Arrow gives me a +1 to my attacks except against undead. Now the bottom tier of stuff are specialties, and that's what these tokens are for. I might have a chance to gain these as well, and if you put the specialties down here, they behave sort of the same way, but they're only one-time use effects. So if I was to put it on the Urine Luck Arrow, then which has, yes, a vial of urine on it, you gain attack +1 against animal attacks, but then you have to get rid of the token. So sometimes these are pretty powerful, like getting to re-roll a die is super powerful with the full quiver ability, but it's only a one-time go. Just to show you some of the other characters, you have Kiryu here. His special ability is that if he rolls a 1 for any reason, he can choose to re-roll, and your own traps have no effect on you. Now traps are something, that's what these actual red token cards are for. These will remind you of the different types of traps and special abilities that some of the characters have, and they'll tell you to put out certain types of tokens which may impede your other players, because remember, this is a competitive game. You're working against each other. It might be negative. It might be like nasty plants that slow your movement or what have you. And there's a lot of different characters for you to choose from, and there's actually better full color artwork on the back of all these cards as well. So just to help sort of bring some of the theme out. Now, some of the other components in the game, first thing I should say is that there are these cool little miniatures that I think only come with the Kickstarter edition of the game. If you're, here, I'll try to see if I can get a little close-up of one of these, but if you don't have these in your game, instead what you have are standees that you'll swap out different character artwork with, and they actually kind of obscure most of the artwork of the characters, the actual little black stands. But in any event, these are what you actually put on the board to signify where you are and where you're going. You also have 3 dice in the game. One of them is the battle die, which is just a simple and normal D6 die. Then you have the movement die. The movement die has movements 1 through 5, and this is a roll and move game. So every time you roll the die, if you get a 1 through 5, you move that many spaces forward, always following the rails and the little the direction in which they're going. But if you roll the question mark on the die, which is the research symbol, then instead of moving, you instead have to immediately roll the research die. The research die has several different faces. This one lets you take an item right away. This one lets you take a specialty right away, and there's a few different of those faces. This is the event card face. So if you roll the event card, you're going to have to draw one of the event cards, obviously. And event cards are usually pretty bad, or sometimes can be good depending on how they play out. So an example of an event card: enemy of my enemy. All players who are not in the last place roll the challenge die, which is the red die. The player in last place moves up 3 spaces plus an additional 3 spaces for each player who rolled a 2 or less. I'll show you one more example of those. Let's find a good one. You have toxic pollen. All players move 8 spaces either forward or backward towards the nearest water zone. You are the only player who can be affected by the space that you land on. And, well, one more. There's a lot of enemy attacks cards. So this one would affect all players take turns rolling the challenge die. The first player who rolls a 6 encounters Coleman. Defense of 5, win, go forward 6 spaces, lose, go back 10 spaces. Any combat in this game, I'll just cover this now, is simply rolling the challenge die, the red die, and trying to beat the number. Ties always go to the defender. If you win, you win. If you lose, and you take the negative effect of whatever it might be. If players ever land on another player's space, the player that you land on has the option of, whoever is the active player has the option of engaging in a battle just like that, where players just roll off against each other to see who is forced to move backwards 1 space. That's really all that battles do in this game. Now, the last face of the die, at least I believe it is, yes, and there's only one face of the die that's like this, is the adventure face. When you roll an adventure on the research die, you get to take one of these adventure cards depending on where you are. So if you were in Harper, then you would look for the Harper card. Let's see, they're all double-sided and probably pretty hard to find. Let's see if I can find it. There we go, sorry. All right, that took way too long. Anyways, so it'll have a little bit of story, and then it will tell you what to do. You can take advantage of the situation and take from the defense list, take any one marker, and move up to 2 spaces, ending your turn. Or you can help the townspeople and pick off a few scavengers, roll the challenge die. If you roll a 1, 2, or 3, you can draw a card. If you choose, you may roll again, and so on. And if you fail, you may have to go back 7 spaces at the end of that. And let me show you one of my favorite ones. This one just says that you roll it. There's a little bit of story reference here. Then you roll the challenge die. If you roll a 1, 2, 4, 5, or 6, continue. Now roll again. 2, 3, 4, or 5, continue. If you roll a 2, 5, or 6, you can continue. If you roll a 1 or 5, you continue. If you miss any of those, you go back 4 spaces. If you successfully roll all the above, you get 2 cards and 3 markers. And that's pretty much how the adventures go. There's lots more dice rolling, possibly getting some resources for having done so. When you actually move around the board in Crosshairs, the different spaces on the boards have different effects. Let's see if I can actually zoom in a little here. So for instance, this space is actually going to give you an item pouch right away. This one, as you can see, has the event icon on it, so that one's going to force you to draw an event card. Any of these spaces that are slightly off color from the other spaces let you draw stronghold cards. Stronghold cards, you can have 4 of these at a time, and usually whenever an item refers to you letting you draw a card, that's what it's referring to. And the stronghold cards are usually pretty powerful effects that can give you a bonus or knock your opponents back. So let's see if I can focus that a bit more. So for instance, knowledge, you play this card to avoid the effects of the scary path ability. It has no effect on you, and you may go again. Distraction, you play this card after another player rolls a movement die to force them to re-roll. The Juju Jr., you put a Juju Jr. token on a person, and the next time that a 5 is rolled by that player for movement, you move instead, they stay where they were. So these can be both negative and positive things depending on who is hit by them. You also have water spaces out on the board. Here's a specialty marker, meaning you get to take one of those. And then you have the testing ground spaces, these little bloodstain spaces, which are almost always really, really bad cards. You'll draw, as soon as you have to draw one, you'll draw it and take the negative effect or positive effect sometimes right away. So this one is a positive effect. Clear path, you get to advance 4 spaces and draw a card, whereas Radiation Blast usually is not going to be good. You roll a challenge die and go back that many spaces. If you roll a 6, go back and lose 1 card. Or Scary Path, which I mentioned before, go back 6 spaces. If you're within 8 spaces of Sazu, the area, go back 8 spaces. Lost and Found. Only an idiot would screw this up. Roll the challenge die. 1 through 5 acquire a marker. 6, you don't get squat, which makes you an idiot. Well, that pretty much sums up the game, actually. So that's pretty much what's going on in Crosshairs. You're really trying to get over to the factory as fast as you possibly can before the other players are, constantly moving back and forth, moving back down, constantly getting kicked back down, taking markers, losing markers, using special abilities, drawing cards, using cards. It's actually relatively simple. Let's go ahead and get to my final thoughts.
Alright, well, first thing I have to say here is that I love the artwork in this game, and actually the art was done by the designer of the game as well. He kind of handled all the major heavy lifting on this game: design, artwork, graphic design, layout, all these different things. And I really, really love the aesthetic here. I'm not into like furries per se, but I really just love the style, and it works really, really well. And I found myself always wanting to see more and more of the artwork, and in fact I'll probably end up seeking out more of, his name is Jesse, I'm sorry, I'm probably going to butcher his last name, but it's like Jesse Lab, or Jesse LeBay. That is the designer and the artist, and I think it's really, really fantastic work. The theme, like I was saying in the intro, there is a short storybook that comes with the game. I kind of skimmed through it. I didn't read all of it. It didn't really seem to give a backstory of the world, although I could be wrong, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on. It seems like these rabbits were kind of mutated, and there's this testing ground, this atomic testing ground, where evil things are happening. The theme is actually, even though it's supposed to be more of a lighthearted family game, I'm not really sure if that really came across as, well, I didn't mean to make a pun there, by the way, but it actually seems a little bit dark in some instances. Some of the cards, like the radiation card, but that's okay. I like that. I kind of like that. I dig that sort of aesthetic. I wish I knew more about what was going on, but it was kind of, it's not a big deal. So artwork and theme are just awesome. Really, really love it. And I think even the board looks fantastic as far as the actual graphic design. The little miniatures that I think are Kickstarter exclusive are cool. I'm not entirely sure about that, but and the extra characters and the artwork and the graphic design on the character cards, I don't like the standees at all. But I mean, I understand why some games have to have standees, but what bummed me out about it was that the standees actually have, for as small as they are, they have a decent amount of artwork of the character, but the actual stands that you put them in, if you put them down on the way, it covers up most of the artwork. I hope that came across well in my overview. It's kind of hard to explain, but that kind of bummed me out. But other than that, physically speaking, the game is pretty solid. And I'm sorry to say that that is where my praise for the game is going to end. And I just wanted to get that out of the way up front, because those are really stellar aspects of the game. Everything else is pretty atrocious. This is it's a roll and move game, and it's really advanced Chutes and Ladders, or advanced Candyland. Or maybe another way to put it is that it's Chutes and Ladders with Munchkin, a smattering of Munchkin. And That's not a good thing. Even if you like Munchkin, I think you're going to see that as a pretty bad thing. There's no decision making here. Just the most minuscule of decision making, and that only comes from the special abilities that the characters have. And that's kind of cool that every character has their own different abilities, and you get these item tokens and you fill out where you want them to go and what abilities you have access to. That's another positive of this game, but it's so irrelevant, because what it really comes down to is that you're rolling dice, hoping you move as far as you possibly can, and hoping you don't land on a space that makes you go back 10 spaces. And that is not an exaggeration. There are a number of cards that will do that to you. Or other players will do that to you with the stronghold cards that they play, or even just like the testing ground cards, which might have a negative effect that even though another player drew it, it affects everybody. Or the event cards. I mean, there are so many ways in this game that you were just totally set back, but not for any particular reason. Not because you played the game poorly, or because you just didn't, even if you just didn't roll well enough, even if you rolled fantastically, you might just get hit with cards that set you all the way back to the beginning. It happened all the time in the games that we played. And all of that is lazy design, and all of that it is lengthening the game to an absurd length. This game should be 20 minutes. 20 minutes, and none of the games that we played lasted less than an hour. And the first game that we played lasted close to 2 hours. And it wasn't because we were going very slowly or had analysis paralysis. That would be non-existent in this game because you don't have any decisions to make. All that was slowing us down was the fact that nobody could get ahead. And if someone does pull far enough ahead, surprise, you have the pile on the leader syndrome. Everyone takes every negative card they have, and from now on you focus on that guy. But at a certain point in every game we've played, people were like, you know what? We're not doing that anymore. We just want this to end. Please win. Okay? That is the sure sign that something is horribly, horribly wrong in the game. Now, I like that there are, like I said, I already like that there's the different items and the specialties that you can use, and that's kind of neat. And that's the problem, though. There's things in this game that seem very cool at first glance, and like they're great ideas, like having these items, or the adventure cards. The adventure cards had the potential to be like this incredibly cool thing that kind of elevated this game to the next level. And you get to a different area, and I was so excited when this actually happened, because as the game book points out, it is rare. You have to essentially roll the question mark, which is a 1 in 6 chance on your movement die, and then roll the A adventure mark on the other die, like the research die, which is another 1 in 6 chance. But if it happens, you have an adventure. Like, oh, great. So the first time it happened, everyone's so excited to like grab a card, and it's just more random dice rolling. One of them is just, you bet. Like, I think I'm going to roll higher than the number I'm about to roll. Or one of them is, the most absurd one, I can't even remember what name part of the map it was roll a die. Roll anything but a 3, you can continue. Okay, now roll a die. If you roll anything but these 2 numbers, you can continue. Okay, now roll a die. If you roll anything but these 4 numbers, you can continue. And if you get through all that, you just get to move a few spaces ahead. That's all. No cool thing, no storyline ability, no like awesome special power. You just move a few spaces ahead. And if you don't, you move back. That is the whole game. Battles, that's another area where it could have been cool. You're Crosshairs, you're like these powerful bunny mutants that have these cool special abilities, or you pull items, I guess, little item pouches, and all your characters look like they're outfitted with bows and arrows and guns, and it looks like they've got all this cool gear and tech on. Battles must be awesome, right? We get to our first battle where you land on someone's space, and you have to decide whether you're going to battle them or not. And I start looking up the rules for this. This game is so simple that you just kind of look up the rules as you go. And I made the joke that, watch, it's just going to be like both players roll a die and see who goes higher. And everyone laughed like, ha ha ha. And then we looked it up, and that's what it was. It wasn't a joke anymore. You just roll a die and see who gets higher. That is absurd. Oh man, it's just completely absurd. So nothing in this game works anywhere near as cool as it should. The testing ground cards are just really frustrating and can just set you back. Everyone did their absolute best to avoid them, which I guess is part of the strategy of the game, but sometimes that's just not going to happen. The stronghold cards some of them are way, way unbalanced. Take another turn. There's one that just says you get to move a few extra spaces if you start your turn not in the water, but next to the water. There's just weird, very specific ones like that just are dead weight in your hand. But then there's so many other cards that let you take cards from other players, which if you finally get a really great card and someone just snatches it away from you for no reason, And it's things like that. This is supposed to be a family game. I would never ever choose to play this with younger kids. It would be incredibly frustrating for them. In fact, I think that the whole point of channels like mine and other video reviewers and this whole like renaissance of modern board gaming that we have is to move away from games like this. There's a reason why we don't, talk very highly of Chutes and Ladders in Candyland anymore, because we've moved on. But that's what this game is. It's that game, one of those old games. In fact, I think they use a euphemism on the back of the box. They call it classic trail game. But no, it's a roll and move game, and a poor one at that, with just some extra special abilities and great art. But that's not enough. And that's kind of what frustrates me the most, I think, just overall, is that the storyline looked cool, the artwork looked fantastic, there were a lot of things that could be implemented in a very cool way, like the adventures, like the basic framework and shell of something amazing was here as far as the theme, and all they had to do, if they really just wanted to copy a game, was pick a game that was even, or system that was just mediocre. I would have been okay if the mechanics were just mediocre and the theme was just incredible and brought to life and you went on these cool adventures. I actually kind of think that about Mice and Mystics. The mechanics of Mice and Mystics, I'd rather play Descent any day of the week. It's the same kind of system, but just incredibly simpler. But the story and aesthetic of Mice and Mystics kind of elevated it. But here, the mechanics are just like this giant lead weight just weighing down the entire game. And it's just not fun. It's overly long. It's just too much. There's so many frustrating things that happen during the course of the game. Nobody takes any joy in anyone being all the way back at the start line when they were all the way up in front, because it's just sad and it's not fun. Oh man, I like the character abilities. The minis and the bits are cool, and there was a kernel of a good game to be had here. And I have to even give special props to the ending thing, where you can have this, you roll a random die and one of these different encounters might happen. And instead of just defeating the factory, you have this random story event that might happen. That is so cool. I wish that it was happening through the entire game, and I wish that all that was in a better mechanical game and not Crosshairs. I can't recommend this one, especially not for families. And it's just really sad, because I think that it had real potential here and it just slipped and fell.